So I'm going to start tonight with something that really jumped out at me from Donald Trump's interview with NBC's Kristen Welker, especially because of the way it has been interpreted by some. And that is the way Trump talked about retribution.
You campaigned on destroying the deep state. Do you want Kash Patel to launch investigations into people on that list?
No, I mean, he's going to do what he thinks is right.
Are you going to direct him to do it?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Are you going to go after Joe Biden?
I'm really looking to make our country successful. I'm not looking to go back into the past. I'm looking to make our country successful. Retribution will be through success.
Pam Bondi talks about investigating the investigators. Do you want her to investigate Jack Smith?
I want her to do what she wants to do.
Do you want to see Jack Smith investigated?
Well, I think he's very corrupt, but I want her to do whatever she has to do.
Are you going to direct her
to
prosecute
I'm not.
Jack
She's
Smith?
a very smart person. She was a great attorney general in Florida. She's very experienced. I want her to do what she wants to do. I'm not going to instruct her to do it, no.
I want her to do whatever she wants to do. Now, some people are listening to that and even suggesting, and I mean out loud on television, that Trump has changed. He didn't say he was going to direct anyone to go after anyone. His tone is different. He is a new man. Retribution through success? No, that doesn't sound so bad. But before you jump to what I would consider an inaccurate conclusion, I'd invite you to keep watching the interview, because in that same interview, he also said this.
Cheney was behind it, and so was Benny Thompson and everybody on that committee. For what they did, honestly, they should go to jail.
So you think Liz Cheney should go to jail?
For what they did.
Everyone on the committee, you think?
I think everybody anybody that voted in favor.
Are you going to direct your FBI director and your attorney general to send them to jail?
No, not at all. I think that they'll have to look at that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to focus on drill, baby, drill.
Okay. So he wants Liz Cheney and members of the January 6th committee in jail, but he's not going to direct them to do anything. Now, the idea that Trump would need to direct loyalists like Kash Patel and Pam Bondi to do something like that is pretty laughable. There was never in any administration, and especially not his, going to be some formal sit down or some paper trail where he tells them in a memo in large, bold print from the White House, go investigate my enemies. Here's an attached list. Signed Donald Trump. But that doesn't mean he's not giving them directions, because he is, including in that interview, pretty directly. The boss says Liz Cheney and members of the January 6th committee should be in jail. Is it really all that different because he didn't scream that direction? Because he attempted to give himself some public plausible deniability, I suppose? Of course not. How do you think Kash Patel and Pam Bondi are going to hear what he said in that interview? I think you know the answer to that question. They already know what he wants, and they've known that for a long time.
I will appoint a real special prosecutor to go after the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America, Joe Biden. She should be impeached and prosecuted for her actions.
Wouldn't it be terrible to throw the president's wife and the former Secretary of State, think of it, the former Secretary of State, but the president's wife into jail? It's very possible that it's going to happen to them.
She should be prosecuted. Nancy Pelosi should be prosecuted. The judge and the AG should be arrested and punished accordingly. They should be prosecuted for what they did. If the reporter doesn't want to tell you, it's bye-bye. The reporter goes to jail. These people should be put in jail the way they talk about our judges and our justices. Prosecutors should be prosecuted.
Kash Patel and Pam Bondi already know what the assignment is. They have their marching orders. You just heard them many times over. And there's a reason he picked both of them for these jobs. Donald Trump made sure to hand select people for these positions who are ready and willing to carry the assignment out. And that's how this is going to work. A bit of a wink, a little nudge, comment here and a comment there, laying some very obvious breadcrumbs for everyone to see, like saying it many times very publicly. He did that also in the Meet the Press interview. And he's been doing it for years. And look, I sincerely hope Trump decides not to go after his political enemies. I hope the loyalists that he wants to install in these top law enforcement jobs decide not to go after them either. We should all hope that. I mean, that would be way better for the country. But it's also important to be realistic in moments like this and to not put our heads in the sand here, because Donald Trump has told us what he plans to do many, many times. And trust me, listen carefully, listen closely, I guess. He just told us once again in that interview what he wants to do. The tone might have been different, but the message was very, very clear. Joining me now is someone who knows a thing or two about retribution from Donald Trump. Unfortunately, Preet Bharara is the former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, who was fired by Trump back in 2017. Okay, Preet, so I just gave my take on whether Trump has changed his plans for political retribution. Again, I certainly hope he has. But when you listen to that interview and the clips I played and any other parts of it you listened to yesterday, knowing what you know, what do you think?
So I think that you have it pretty much correct. Look, you don't know because the future is the future and people change their minds and something may happen on a different timeline. But if you take as lawyers like to say, in the totality of the circumstances, you have a person who has talked about retribution day after day, week after week, month after month. He has appointed people, as you also pointed out, who themselves have taken a page from Donald Trump's rhetorical book and said they want to jail and prosecute people, including, by the way, his first Attorney General nominee who fell by the wayside, Matt Gaetz, and then the substitute Attorney General nominee, Pam Bondi, has said similar things, and then joined that with the FBI Director nominee who has not only said things about prosecuting and holding people who had those jobs previously accountable, but also has an appendix to his book that reads like an enemies list. So, I agree with your hope and join you in the hope that Donald Trump is not going to just decide willy-nilly to go after political rivals who are just doing their jobs, whether they were judges, whether they were prosecutors, whether they were members of Congress, all of whom, by the way, enjoy some form of the immunity that Donald Trump has been seeking for years because they're just doing their jobs. I hope that that's true, but fool me once, as they say. We'll see what happens, but all the evidence points to the fact that Donald Trump doesn't have to instruct his people. He essentially and effectively instructed them by being on that television program on your network and saying this is what he wants with respect to the January 6th committee. So I don't hold out a lot of hope, but a little bit.
This was, the reason these remarks, he said it many times before, this was his first interview as president-elect, and I think it's very important not to get numb to what he's saying, which is why I wanted to talk about it. So I wanted to ask you, though, about kind of if he wanted to move forward with this, or if his team, as you noted, who very much know what their directions are, wanted to move forward with it, if the Justice Department wanted to put someone like Liz Cheney in jail, or at least make their lives difficult, how would they do it? What would their approach be?
Yeah, so, it's hard to know because, as I said, most of the people that Donald Trump and others have been talking about are people who are engaging in conduct in connection with their official duties, right? Prosecutors bring cases, members of Congress conduct hearings, they pass legislation, judges decide cases, all within the ambit and normal duties and obligations and within the perimeter of their jobs, which usually is off limits for even a civil suit, much less a criminal prosecution. What I worry about is not so much at the end of the day that someone will be convicted and sent to prison on trumped-up charges or false pretenses, but that the very act of making the inquiry, right, which is a very easy thing to do, at the end of the day, to send someone to prison and get them convicted, you have to prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt. To open up an investigation and begin, a process that puts people under the gun, that costs them a lot of money, sometimes it can cost them their life savings, is a much, much lower standard. And you can imagine that if they were going to do this, and again, I join you in your hope that they're not, as political retribution, they will find some reason to say, well, maybe they destroyed evidence. They're saying that about the 1-6 committee, which I don't know any evidence of that. Or that there was a misstatement made in connection with some hearing, or there was something malicious in the way people went about it. And at the end of the day, after a year or 2 years or 3 years, it gets thrown out or it gets defeated in court. In the meantime, people have had their reputations ruined and people have had their bank accounts emptied. That's my worry here. And I've talked to, by the way, actual people, and I know folks who are representing actual people who have been in government and are on this list in the crosshairs of people like Donald Trump and the folks that he's planning to bring into government. And they're not people who run around with their hair on fire. You know, they're reasonable people, and they're worried about this.
For good reason. And as much as I think we're both hopeful, I think the important thing is I don't think either of us are naive, and no one should be, about what's possible here. Let me ask you about something that happened today. Incoming Senate Judiciary Chair Chuck Grassley called for FBI Director Christopher Wray to step aside. He has 3 more years in his term. There's a reason they're 10-year terms, so that they can cross over different parties and administrations. And he wrote in there, for the good of the country, it's time for you and your deputy to move on to the next chapter in your lives. I therefore must express my vote of no confidence in your continued leadership of the FBI. He was a Trump appointee, Christopher Wray. What do you have experienced, not exactly this, but a version of this. What do you think in this moment Christopher Wray should do? Should he resign, or should he make Trump fire him, I suppose?
Well, I'm partial to having the historical record be clear. And if you have a term of a certain number of years, my situation was somewhat different. But if you're Chris Wray and you were appointed by the guy who's coming back into office, and you shook his hand and he said, I want you to be my FBI director for 10 years, and you believe, and I think the record reflects, that you haven't done anything untoward, you haven't done anything improper, you haven't laid down on the job, why should you leave? Allow the historical record to show that the person who wanted you to stay for some other reason, although it's his constitutional right, I believe, to fire Chris Wray, even though there's a 10-year term. I'm not disputing that. But if the point is that you want to remove an FBI director to put in another FBI director who's less qualified, who has less of the proper disposition to be an FBI director, and who is going to go after your political enemies, then I think the record is better for history to have demanded to be fired rather than resign voluntarily in advance.